The alarms had been screaming for 10 minutes when Cole finally accepted that he was going to die on the station. He ran through the smoke-filled corridor, his boots pounding against metal floors that shook with each new explosion somewhere deep in the station's core. The lights had failed 5 minutes ago. Now only the red emergency strips along the walls showed him where to go. They painted everything the color of blood. Was 34 years old. He had survived the border conflicts, the siege of Titan Base, and 3 separate assassination attempts on the diplomats he was assigned to protect. He had always known he would die in space. He had just hoped it would be quick. The station was called Harmony's Reach, and it hung in orbit around a gas giant that humans could not pronounce properly. It was supposed to be neutral ground, a place where species that hated each other could come and talk without killing each other. Today, the station's reactor had decided to kill everyone equally. Reached the junction where he was supposed to meet the other human security officers. The corridor was empty. Through the cracked window, he could see escape pods launching into the darkness, their engines burning bright against the swirling clouds of the planet below. They had left without him. He stood there for a moment, breathing hard, and then he laughed. It was not a happy sound. He had spent 20 minutes helping evacuate civilians from the lower decks, carrying an injured trader on his back for 6 floors because the elevators had died. By the time he reached the rendezvous point, his people were gone. He could not blame them. The station was dying. Every second mattered. Checked his communicator. Dead. The electromagnetic pulses from the failing reactor had killed most electronics on the station. He was alone, with no way to call for help, and the temperature was dropping fast. The environmental systems were failing. In an hour, maybe less, this whole section would be frozen or on fire or both. He started walking. There had to be other escape pods. There had to be something. That was when he heard the screaming. It was not human screaming. The sound was high and sharp, like metal scraping against glass, and it came from somewhere ahead. Drew his sidearm and moved toward it. He did not think about why. He just moved. The corridor opened into a wide chamber that had once been a waiting area for diplomatic visitors. Now it was a disaster. The ceiling had partially collapsed, bringing down chunks of metal and plastic that blocked most of the exits. Emergency foam had sprayed everywhere, trying to seal breaches in the hull. And in the middle of the chaos saw them. The alien was huge, 8 feet tall, with 4 arms and scales that caught the red emergency light and threw it back in rainbow patterns. I had seen them before from a distance at diplomatic functions. They were one of the older species in this sector of the galaxy, respected and powerful. This one was female, a matriarch based on the ceremonial markings on her scales. She was trapped. A massive beam had fallen across her lower body, pinning her to the floor. Dark blue blood pooled beneath her, and her 4 arms pushed uselessly against the weight that held her down. But she was not the one screaming. The younglings were. There were 6 of them, each about the size of a large dog, with the same rainbow scales as their mother but softer, more delicate. They scattered around the room, crying in those high, painful frequencies, trying to reach their mother and being driven back by the debris and the cold. Holstered his weapon and stepped into the room. The matriarch saw him, her eyes large and golden, fixed on him with an expression he could not read. Fear, maybe, or anger. He was a human, a predator species by every biological definition. His ancestors had hunted creatures in the dark. His teeth were designed for tearing meat. Everything about him probably screamed danger to her instincts. He ignored her stare and moved toward the nearest youngling. The small creature backed away from him, its scales rippling with distress colors. It was shivering. Suddenly remembered something from his xenobiology briefings. Were cold-blooded. The adults could survive temperature drops that would kill a human, but the young were different. The young needed warmth. The environmental systems were failing. The temperature was already dropping toward freezing. These children were going to die. Crouched down and held out his hand. The youngling hissed at him, but it did not run. It was too cold to run. Its movements were becoming slow and clumsy. He reached out and picked it up. The creature struggled for a moment, but then it felt his warmth. Humans ran hot compared to most species. To a freezing youngling was like a living furnace. The small creature stopped fighting and pressed itself against his chest, making a sound he had never heard before. A soft chirping, almost like a cat's purr. The matriarch made a sound, looked up and saw something strange in her golden eyes. Confusion, shock, maybe the beginning of something like hope. He did not have time for hope. He moved to the next youngling and the next, gathering them up. They clung to him, their small claws digging into his uniform, their bodies pressing against any exposed skin they could find. He put 3 against his chest, inside his jacket. The other 3 climbed onto his back, wrapping their tails around his arms and neck. He was covered in alien children. They were all chirping now, that strange purring sound, and their shivering was starting to slow. Walked toward the trapped matriarch. He looked at the beam pinning her down, and then he looked at her. She spoke. Her voice was deep and resonant, and the translator in his ear was damaged, giving him only fragments. Leave, children, escape, you. She was telling him to take her children and go, to leave her to die. Shook his head. He crouched down beside her and examined the beam. It was heavy, too heavy for him to lift alone, but he had a plasma cutter on his belt, meant for breaching doors in emergencies. He pulled it out and activated it. Blue fire sprang to life in his hand. "I'm not leaving anyone," he said. The matriarch stared at him. On his chest and back, her children chirped and purred, clinging to the strange, warm creature who had appeared from nowhere and gathered them up like they were his own. She did not understand. Nothing in her long life had prepared her for this. The human began to cut. The plasma cutter burned through metal slowly, too slowly, worked in silence, his jaw tight, while the station shook and groaned around them. The younglings on his body had stopped shivering, but they had not stopped making that soft chirping sound. It vibrated against his skin, strange and somehow comforting. The matriarch watched him work. Her name was, though he did not know this yet. She was 230 years old, a diplomat and a mother, and she had traveled across half the galaxy to negotiate a trade agreement that now seemed very unimportant. She watched the human cut through the beam that trapped her, and she tried to understand what she was seeing. Knew about humans. Everyone in the galaxy knew about humans by now. They were a young species, barely 3 centuries into space travel, but they had spread fast and they had survived things that should have killed them. They were predators, omnivores, persistent hunters who had evolved to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They were dangerous. But they were not supposed to be this. The smallest youngling, the one had picked up first, was pressed against his neck. Its tail was wrapped around his throat, not tight enough to choke, just tight enough to hold on. Its small head was tucked under his chin. It was making sounds that had never heard a youngling make toward anyone except its own mother. Bonding sounds, imprinting sounds. Her child was claiming this human as family. The beam finally gave way, pushed the pieces aside and knelt beside her, examining her leg. The damage was bad. Dark blue blood had soaked into the floor, and the leg bent at an angle that was not natural. She would need medical care soon, or she would lose the limb entirely. The human did not flinch at the sight. He simply nodded, as if confirming something to himself, and then he looked at her face. "Can you walk if you lean on me?" His translator was damaged, and his words came through with static and gaps, but she understood enough. She tried to stand, using her 4 arms to push herself up, and immediately collapsed. The pain was too great. The leg would not hold her weight. She expected him to leave then. It was the logical thing to do. He had done more than anyone could ask already. He had saved her children. Now he should take them and go, find an escape pod, survive. She would die here, but her bloodline would continue. That was what mattered. The human sighed. It was a tired sound, the sound of someone who had been tired for a very long time. "Okay," he said, "we do this the hard way." He crouched down and pulled her arm over his shoulders. Then, with a grunt of effort, he stood, lifting her weight. He was not tall for a human, and she was large even for a. The younglings on his body chirped in alarm as he staggered, almost fell, and then found his balance. "Hold on to me," he said. "We're getting out of here." He began to drag her toward the maintenance tunnels. The journey that followed was the longest of his life. The tunnels were dark and narrow, designed for service robots rather than living beings. Moved through them by memory and by touch, one hand holding a small emergency light, the other keeping upright against his side. He talked constantly. She did not understand most of it. Her translator gave her words like "okay" and "almost there" and "good job," but often he spoke too fast for the damaged device to follow. He was not talking to her, she realized. He was talking to the younglings. He was singing to them. The songs made no sense to her. They were simple and repetitive, with strange words about stars and dreams and something called a mockingbird. But the younglings loved them. They pressed closer to him with each song, their chirping becoming softer and more content. At one point, the smallest youngling fell asleep against his neck. Its breathing became slow and deep, and its grip on him relaxed. Adjusted his hold carefully, making sure the sleeping child would not fall, and kept walking. Had been a mother for 112 years. She had raised 4 clutches before this one. She knew what maternal instinct looked like. This human had it. This predator, this meat-eater, this creature whose ancestors had hunted in darkness and killed with their bare hands. He was carrying her children against his body and singing them to sleep. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was weak and the word came out barely louder than a whisper. "Why do you help?" The human glanced at her. In the dim light, his eyes looked very dark, very tired. "They're kids," he said. "They're scared, they need help. They are not your kind." He shrugged, and the movement made the younglings on his back chirp softly. "So what?" She did not have an answer for that. In her experience, species helped their own. That was the natural order. You protected your bloodline, your clan, your nation. You did not risk your life for strangers, especially strangers who looked nothing like you. But this human did not seem to understand that rule. Or perhaps he understood it and simply did not care. They reached a junction where 3 tunnels met. Stopped, breathing hard, and set her down against the wall. The younglings immediately climbed off him and surrounded her, chirping with concern, pressing their small bodies against her for comfort. All except the smallest one. That one stayed on the human's shoulder, still sleeping, still holding on. Looked at the 3 tunnel entrances, trying to remember which one led to the escape pods. His skin was pale and covered in sweat. Realized that he was suffering. The temperature in the tunnels was dropping further, and while the cold would kill her children, it was not pleasant for humans either. His body was working hard to keep him warm, and that effort was draining him. He was killing himself to save them. She reached out with one of her arms and touched his hand. It was strange to touch a human. Their skin was so soft, so warm, like touching a living flame. "Thank you," she said. He looked down at her hand on his, and something in his expression shifted. For just a moment, he looked very young. Then he pulled away gently and pointed to the left tunnel. "That way," he said. "I think, can you stand?" She could not. But she would try, because he was trying, because he was giving everything he had for her children, and she would not let that sacrifice be wasted. She stood. The pain was terrible, but she stood. Together, with 6 younglings wrapped around them both and the station dying around them, they walked toward the light. The cargo bay was supposed to be empty. Stopped at the entrance and felt his stomach drop. The massive room stretched before them, filled with shipping containers and loading equipment, and the soft blue glow of the escape pod dock at the far end. Between them and those pods stood 12 figures that made his blood run cold. Species 7 feet tall with armored bodies and mandibles that could cut through steel. They were mercenaries, scavengers, the kind of creatures that showed up after battles to pick through the dead. Had fought them before, years ago, on a station very much like this one. He remembered what they did to prisoners. They had already seen them. Their compound eyes reflected the emergency lighting as they turned, weapons raised, and could see their mandibles clicking with what passed for laughter among their kind. Human, the largest one said. Its translator gave the word a buzzing quality, and a how fortunate. Set down behind a cargo container, the younglings immediately clustered around her, sensing the danger, their scales flickering with fear colors. The smallest one, the one that had bonded with him most strongly, tried to climb back onto his shoulder. He gently pushed it toward its mother. "Stay here," he whispered. "Stay quiet." He stepped out from behind the container and faced the. They had formed a rough line between him and the escape pods. 12 of them, all armed, all watching him with the patient hunger of predators who knew they had cornered their prey. The leader stepped forward. It was larger than the others, its armor from old battles. The matriarch wears diplomatic markings. Her government will pay well for her return. And the young, the mandibles clicked again. The young have value in certain markets. Felt something cold settle in his chest. It was not fear. He had been afraid many times in his life, and he knew what fear felt like. This was different. This was older. "You're not touching them," he said. The leader tilted its head. "You are one human, we are 12. You have a sidearm with half a charge. We have plasma rifles. This is not a negotiation you can win." "I'm not negotiating." Behind the container pressed her hand over her youngest's mouth to keep it quiet. She could see the human through a gap in the metal. He was standing very still, his arms at his sides, his eyes fixed on the leader. He did not look afraid. He looked like something else entirely. "You are being foolish," the said. "Give us the and you may leave on the human shuttle we captured. Your species has no stake in this. Walk away." Shook his head slowly. "Let me tell you a story." The leader made a sound of annoyance, but something in the human's voice made it pause, made it listen. "A few years ago," said, "there was a colony on 22B, farming colony, mostly families, about 300 people. One day a group of slavers came, different species not but similar. They wanted workers for their mines. They took everyone they could find." He paused, "including the children." The cargo bay was very quiet. Even the station's groaning and shaking seemed to fade. The slavers thought they were safe. They thought no one would come for a bunch of farmers on the edge of human space. They were wrong. His voice had not changed. It was still calm, still quiet, but something in it made the air feel heavier. Earth sent 3 ships, not warships, transport ships, full of volunteers, regular people, teachers, mechanics, shopkeepers, people who had never held a gun in their lives. He took a step forward. They did not move. "Do you know what they did to those slavers?" The leader's mandibles had stopped clicking. "They found the base. They surrounded it, and then they went in. No prisoners, no mercy, no survivors." Took another step. "The rescue teams found the children in the lower levels. They were scared, but they were alive, every single one of them." Another step. "The slavers, well, there was not much left to identify." He was close to the now, close enough that he could see the small movements of their compound eyes, tracking him, calculating. "That's what humans do," he said softly. "When you touch our children, when you threaten what we protect, we don't send soldiers, we don't send warships, we send everyone, and we don't stop until there's nothing left of you." The leader shifted its weight. For the first time it looked uncertain. "These are not human children," it said. "They are, this is not your concern." Smiled, it was not a pleasant smile. "I claimed them," he said. "I wrapped them in my jacket, I sang them to sleep. I carried them through the dark. They're mine now." His hand moved to his sidearm very slowly. "So let me ask you something. Are 12 of you enough? Are you willing to bet your lives on it?" They looked at each other. Their mandibles clicked in low, rapid communication. Watched from her hiding place, her heart's pounding, her children pressed against her. The human stood alone before 12 armed killers, and he was not afraid. He was not even angry. He was simply certain. Certain that he would fight. Certain that he would die before he let them pass. Certain that whatever happened, they would pay for it in blood. She had heard stories about humans. Everyone had. The species that would not stop. The species that would chase you across the galaxy if you hurt their pack. The species that loved so fiercely it turned into madness. She had always thought the stories were exaggerated. She was wrong. The leader stepped back. Its mandibles clicked one final time, and then it turned and walked toward the far exit. The others followed, one by one, until the cargo bay was empty except for and the family he had claimed. He stood there for a long moment, not moving. Then his shoulders dropped, and he let out a breath that shook slightly. When he turned back his face was pale and tired. "Let's go," he said, "before they change their minds." He helped her up. The younglings swarmed around him, chirping and climbing and pressing close. The smallest one wrapped its tail around his arm and would not let go. Together they walked toward the escape pods. The escape pod was small. It was designed with curved walls and low lighting, and a temperature control system that could not read because the labels were in a language he did not understand. He loaded first, helping her through the narrow hatch and onto one of the padded benches that lined the walls. The younglings followed, scrambling over each other in their rush to stay close to their mother and to him. The smallest one had given up on walking entirely and simply clung to his chest, its tail wrapped around his waist. Squeezed through the hatch last and sealed it behind him. Through the small window, he could see the station's hull, buckled and burning. They had maybe minutes before the whole thing came apart. He found the launch controls and pressed what he hoped was the right button. The pod shuddered, and then there was a sharp jolt as the clamps released. They shot away from the dying station, spinning slightly before the autopilot stabilized their course. They were safe. For a long moment, no one moved. Sat with her eyes closed, her 4 arms wrapped around as many of her children as she could reach. The younglings were quiet for the first time since the alarms had started, their fear finally giving way to exhaustion. Then noticed the temperature. The pod's life support was designed for biology, cold-blooded creatures who needed warmth to survive, especially the young. The system was automatically adjusting to optimal conditions for its passengers, and that meant the temperature was rising. Vast was already sweating. His uniform stuck to his skin, and each breath felt thick and heavy. He looked at the temperature control panel and tried to figure out how to lower it, but the symbols meant nothing to him. "The controls," he said. "How do I turn down the heat?" Opened her eyes. She looked at him, then at the panel, and her expression shifted to something like alarm. "The young need warmth," she said. "If the temperature drops, they will become sick. They could die." Looked at the younglings. They were finally calm, finally comfortable, their scales a healthy bright color instead of the dull of cold and fear. The smallest one was still pressed against his chest, asleep again, its breathing slow and peaceful. He thought about what would happen if he lowered the temperature. The children would suffer. After everything they had been through, they would suffer more. He pulled his hand away from the panel. "Okay," he said, "we leave it. But you." "I'll be fine." He was not fine. Within an hour, his head was pounding and his vision was starting to blur. The pod's internal temperature had reached levels that his body was not designed to handle. Humans were adaptable, more adaptable than most species, but there were limits. He was reaching his. Watched him suffer. She saw the sweat pouring down his face, the way his hands shook, the moments when his eyes would drift closed and his body would sway. She wanted to lower the temperature. She wanted to help him. But every time she moved toward the controls, she looked at her children, calm and warm and safe for the first time in hours, and she could not do it. And he did not ask her to. The second hour was worse. Had removed his jacket and his shirt, trying to cool down, but it was not enough. The heat was cooking him from the inside. He had stopped sweating, which he knew was a bad sign. His body was running out of water. He passed out for the first time somewhere around the third hour. When he woke, he found the younglings pressed against him. All 6 of them had left their mother and surrounded him, their small bodies touching his skin, their tails wrapped around his arms and legs. They were making that soft chirping sound again, the bonding sound, the sound of comfort and love. They were trying to help him. They did not understand that their warmth was hurting him. They only knew that he was sick, that he was their protector, and that they wanted to be close to him. He tried to push them away. He could not. His arms would not obey him. So he lay there, burning, surrounded by the children he had saved, and he thought about his life. He thought about his mother, who had died when he was 19. Cancer. She had gone slowly, piece by piece, and he had sat beside her bed every day until the end. He thought about the family he had never built, the relationships that had never survived his work, the empty apartments he had come home to on 100 different worlds. He had spent his whole life protecting other people's diplomats, other people's stations, other people's children. He had never minded. It was what he was good at. It was what he was for. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, he had wondered what it would feel like to have someone protect him. The 4th hour passed, the 5th. Had moved to sit beside him. She could not lower the temperature without hurting her children, but she could be near him. She used her upper arms to fan air across his face, trying to cool him even slightly. It did not help much, but she did it anyway. Why, she asked him, the same question as before but different now, heavier. Why did you stay? Why did you suffer? He opened his eyes. They were bloodshot and unfocused, but he was still there, still present. I told you, he whispered. They're kids, they needed help. You are dying for them. He smiled. It was a weak, terrible smile, the smile of someone who had accepted something. No, I'm living for them, different thing. She did not understand, but she thought maybe she was beginning to. The 6th hour. The pod sensors detected a rescue ship approaching. The autopilot began broadcasting a distress signal. Passed out again. This time he did not wake up on his own. The younglings cried for him. They pressed against his still body, chirping and wailing in distress, and when the rescue team finally opened the pod, they would not leave him. The human medics had to pry them off one by one, and even then, the smallest one clung to his hand until the very last moment. As they carried toward the human medical shuttle, followed as far as she could, a medic stopped her at the junction, asking questions, checking her children. Who is he? The medic asked, pointing at the unconscious human being loaded onto a stretcher. What's his relationship to you? Thought about everything she had seen. The courage and the sacrifice and the love that made no sense by any logic she knew. And then she spoke words informal that had not been spoken to an outsider in 400 years. The medic's translator could not process them. It was not designed for such things. But the words did not matter. What mattered was that she had spoken them. What mattered was that Cole, whether he knew it or not, was no longer alone. 3 weeks past before was well enough to stand. The doctors had called it severe heat exhaustion, complicated by dehydration, and something they called thermal organ stress. His kidneys had nearly failed. His heart had stopped twice on the operating table. The medical team told him he had been about 20 minutes from permanent brain damage when the rescue ship found them. He spent 2 weeks in a hospital bed, drifting in and out of consciousness, and another week learning how to walk again. The human embassy sent flowers and a commendation letter. His former colleagues from the security team sent messages of congratulations and guilt. A journalist tried to interview him about the evacuation, and he refused. He did not feel like a hero, he felt tired. On the day he was released, a message arrived from the hegemony. It was formal, written in the diplomatic style that meant someone important wanted to see him. It said he was invited to the embassy on 3 for a ceremony in his honor. Almost did not go. He did not want medals or speeches. He just wanted to find a quiet room somewhere and sleep for a month. But then he thought about the younglings. He thought about the smallest one, the one that had slept against his neck, the one that had held his hand until the very last moment. He wanted to see them again. He wanted to know they were okay. So he put on his dress uniform and took a shuttle to the embassy. The building was beautiful, tall spires of crystal and metal, designed to catch the light of the local sun and scatter it in rainbow patterns. It looked like something from a dream. Walked through the entrance, flanked by human diplomatic staff who kept giving him strange looks and tried to figure out why he felt so nervous. It was just a medal, just a handshake with an ambassador, nothing to worry about. The doors to the main chamber opened. Stopped walking. The room was huge, bigger than any space he had seen on the station. Hundreds filled it, standing in neat rows, their scales shimmering in the light. At the far end, on a raised platform, stood 30 figures in ceremonial robes, their markings showing them as matriarchs, the highest leaders of society. And in the center of them all, standing straight despite the cybernetic brace on her leg, was. The younglings saw him first. 6 small shapes broke from the crowd and raced toward him, chirping and crying and scrambling over each other in their desperation to reach him. The smallest one got there first, leaping at him with enough force to knock him back a step. It wrapped its tail around his arm and pressed its head against his chest, making that soft purring sound he remembered from the tunnels. The others followed, climbing him, clinging to him until he was covered in younglings just like he had been on the station. They chirped and cooed and would not let go. The room was silent, every watched. Looked up at. She was smiling, or doing whatever passed for smiling among her people. She walked toward him, her steps careful but steady, and stopped an arm's length away. "You came," she said. "You invited me." He looked around at the crowd, at the matriarchs, at the overwhelming formality of everything. "I thought it would just be a medal or something." "It is not a medal." She raised all 4 of her arms. The room became even more silent, if that was possible, could feel the weight of attention pressing on him from every direction. Spoke in, the words were slow and formal, heavy with meaning. Translator struggled to keep up, giving him fragments. Witness, bond, protection of young, blood of my blood. Then she switched to English. Her accent was thick, but the words were clear. "Cole, you saved my children when you had no reason to save them. You suffered for them when you could have walked away. You protected them as if they were your own blood." She took a step closer. "In my culture, there is a ceremony called the claiming of kin. It is how we adopt those who have proven themselves worthy of our bloodline." Her golden eyes fixed on his. "It has never been offered to someone outside our species. In 400 years, no outsider has been worthy." His heart was pounding. The younglings on his body had gone quiet, sensing the importance of the moment. "I offer it to you now," said. "Before these witnesses, before my sisters and my elders, I claim you as my son. I claim you as kin. I claim you as family." The room erupted in a low, resonant sound, the equivalent of gasps. Could not speak. He looked then at the younglings, then at the hundreds of alien faces watching him with expressions he could not read. He thought about his empty apartments, his dead mother, the family he had never built. He thought about the smallest youngling, the one that had imprinted on him in the frozen tunnels, the one that was pressed against his heart right now. He dropped to his knees. It was not because protocol demanded it. It was because it felt right, because his legs could not hold him anymore, because something inside him was breaking and rebuilding at the same time. "I don't know your ceremonies," he said. His voice was rough. "But where I come from, family means you never have to face the dark alone." Placed her upper hands on his shoulders. The gesture was tender, careful, like she was touching something precious. "Then you will never be alone again, my son." The younglings chirped. The matriarchs bowed their heads, and somewhere in the crowd heard a sound that might have been weeping, though did not weep. He stood slowly, with his hands still on his shoulders. He looked at the younglings wrapped around him, at the mother who had claimed him, at the family he had never expected to find. He smiled, a real smile for the first time in years. Later, when the story spread across the galaxy, other species would hear it and wonder. They would ask how a single human had faced down mercenaries, survived temperatures that should have killed him, and won the loyalty of one of the oldest bloodlines in known space. The answer was simpler than they imagined. Humans protected their young, not just their own young, all young, any young. It was written into their bones, their blood, their souls. They could not help it any more than they could help breathing. And when a human claimed you as family, they meant it forever. They understood this now. So did the who had fled from a single, unarmed man. So did every species that had ever underestimated humanity. Humans were not merely dangerous. They were not merely resilient. They were the species that would burn worlds for children that were not even theirs. And that, more than anything else, was why the galaxy had learned to love them.